But what I'm going to do today, I'm going to not only share a little bit about my story, but also I am going to talk to you about not only the importance of fathers, but as Claire mentioned too, single dads as well. There's a great article and something you can just look up on your own time. It's by a guy named Glenn Stanton. It's called, and it's easy to remember, Why Fathers Matter and Moms Don't Toss Babies. Okay, so I don't know if you've ever seen the picture. It shows the dad tossing the baby, and it shows the baby in the air, and it says how dad sees it. And then it shows the next picture. So here's like how dad sees it. Here's how the kid sees it. And it shows how mom sees it. And the kid's like in the clouds too. So, but I mean, that's what we do as dads. You know, we are the playmates. We're the initiators in a lot of ways. We're the ones that push our kids. We say, come on, you can do it. We're the ones that are supposed to be there for support. And in so many ways, but we're also basically big kids as well, right? So I know a lot of guys here still have that playful part in them as well. So my website, fatherswalk.org, there's cards on the table. Please take this, not only just if you know any single dads or you are a single dad, but at the same time too, I have a lot of fatherhood resources on there as well that I think everybody can relate to, both local and national, faith-based, non-faith-based websites as well. But our mission statement, if you want to grab one of my cards real fast, just grab one of the blue cards there in the middle. The mission statement, we just changed this probably about a year ago. It says we're impacting the lives of children. So I'm not going to lie, I'm using the dads to get to the kids, okay? Because we have a nation right now of kids that are growing up without strong father figures, whether they're completely absent out of the home, or even there could be a man living in the house, but that child's absent of a dad, right? Tons of statistics, I can tell you, tons of them, but basically, we know that when a father is not involved in a child's life, negative things happen, whether it's high school dropouts, substance abuse, criminal behavior, teen pregnancy, teen suicide, runaways, so on. But on the flip side, when dads are involved, we see these kids' socio-emotional behaviors go up. We see an increase in education. We see an increase in just overall perception, self-well-being, things like that as well. That's not to say that if there's kids that come from fatherless homes, they're automatically condemned. Two great men of God. One is Dr. John Trent from Moody Bible Institute. I don't know if anybody's familiar with him. Okay, he grew up with basically an absent father, and now here he is, obviously teaching at Moody Bible Institute. But also, anybody ever heard of a guy? He plays basketball. His name's Kevin Durant. Okay, so grew up in an extremely impoverished, gang-infested, single mother home, and not only is he the reigning MVP, or was the reigning MVP of the NBA, but he's also a Christian as well. So, and as we all know, there's on the flip side, kids that grow up in great two-parent homes as well turn out to not be so God-honoring sometimes. But so we impact the lives of children by encouraging and equipping single fathers to be intentional leaders, because God created us as men to be leaders, whether we're single fathers, whether we're fathers, married, single, anything like that as well, to be intentional leaders in our lives and in the lives of other children as well. So I have a huge passion for not only helping the dads to invest in their kids, even if there's been a split in the family, but also to encourage, this is another sermon for some other time, but to encourage guys like us to pour into the lives of a fatherless child too. So if you'd ever consider mentoring a boy, it only takes an hour a week, and even if you can't mentor on a full-time basis, you'd be surprised at how far some words of encouragement go. If you're at your son and daughter's game or something like that, and you walk up to him and say, hey, Timmy, I saw that play you made at third base, or hey, man, that was an awesome job. Hey, we're going out for ice cream. Ask your mom if you can come. Something like that, just pouring into these kids as well. So feel free to get on my website and check that out. What else we got? Okay, I wrote 2 books. Here's the one that we have right here. This one I self-published back in 2012. That is available today. And then the other one just came out last year. It's called The Daddy Gap. I wrote this with a friend named Dawn. And Dawn was a single mom for probably about 7-8 years. Horrendous story. I mean, her ex-husband basically had a standoff with the police, a gunfire standoff. Thank God he wasn't killed. But, I mean, that obviously caused a massive split in the family. And she was found raising her son alone. So this is really focused on single moms raising fatherless kids and what is the church's position in all of this as well. And we actually believe that the church should be the first response team to fatherless families and not the state. A couple upcoming events, and by the way, I'm not texting up here, I'm just keeping my eye because Claire told me I have a time limit today, so which is a very dangerous thing. 2 upcoming events. You have one, the business card, it says no regrets. It's right there on your table. That's coming up on February 6th. That is a simulcast out of Wisconsin. They have all these big national speakers. They have it live in Wisconsin. They're going to simulcast it here at Grace Bible College, and then we're going to have live breakout sessions. So I'm going to be doing a breakout session on fatherhood, but there will be ones on legacy and all sorts of other business stuff, and it's all for men. So if you can make it on February 6th, and then Iron Sharpens Iron, if you've ever heard of that before, we have our first one coming to Grand Rapids here in April. There are posters right up at the front here. If you want to take one back to your business, your church, please encourage men to come to that as well. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my story. Kind of relates to, the video we saw here. I truly believe that one way or another, good or bad, our fathers have the ability to either make us or break us as adults, right? Hello? Yeah? Okay. So we know, we can just think about our own fathers, what they did do, what they didn't do, but one way or another, fathers have the ability to make us or break us as adults. So I grew up in a home. I went to Forest Hill Central through 8th grade, grew up in Cascade, not exactly the roughest part of town, but my mom and dad were never married. In fact, my dad actually was married, just not to my mom. He was married at the time. They had an affair, and out of that, me and my little brother came out of that little side deal. So instantly, I'm placed in a home where I will not be growing up, despite all these material advantages, without a full-time father figure in there as well. Also, my mom did not take us to church very often. I don't know who runs businesses here, but CEOs, we think of, a business chief executive officer. We were CEOs in the sense that we were Christmas and Easter only as far as going to church. We did the religious thing. So I really had no parental foundation. My mom, kind of kept an eye on us sometimes, not always. Not much. I saw my dad about 4 hours a week growing up as a child, so because for the most part I was really kept a secret probably for the first 10 to 12 years of my life. So I wasn't allowed to call him at work and things. And think of what that does to a son that just can't reach out to his dad. He can't come to my baseball games. He can't do all that stuff. So eventually that would play later into life. So we went to church once in a while, not much of a parental foundation. But for the most part, I was a pretty good kid. Through 8th grade at Forest Hills, I played baseball, I played basketball, got decent grades. Then we moved up to Bel Air, Michigan. Anybody know where Bel Air is? Okay, a couple people. All right, not Fresh Prince of Bel Air. Up there, the deer and the cow population outnumber the people population. At the time, the closest McDonald's was 26 miles away in Kalkaska. They now have one in Bel Air, but tiny little northern Michigan hick town, basically. So, but I moved up there. And again, baseball, basketball, had all the fishing and hunting I could possibly want in an area like that, and was still, for the most part, a relatively good kid. But as I got into my teen years, eventually the girls came in there, eventually the high school parties, things like that, and not having that foundation, I eventually began to naturally gravitate that way because as a young man, teenager, this is just, the way that I was pulled. So, first sexual experience with a girl was 15 years old between my freshman and sophomore year. Second time was 17. Drank a little bit in the first few years of school, but by my senior year, I was drinking on a pretty regular basis. Then I went to college in Traverse City at Northwestern Michigan College, and I met a guy named Dan Jackson. He called himself Action Jackson. He was one of 4 black guys up there in Traverse City at the time, so he and I instantly became good friends, and he saw me as this little project. He was from Tampa, Florida. I don't know how a guy from Tampa, Florida ends up at Northwestern Michigan College. He had this big, long story, but I don't know if I believe it. So, but Dan and I became best friends. Dan is now Pastor Dan Jackson, by the way, and he and I have been friends since August of 1994. So, just an incredible man of God. But at the time, he wasn't, and he introduced me to another guy named Jack Daniels, and who I actually got along with very well. And at the time, I pretty much, me and Dan, we would drink. Once in a while, we went to class. Eventually, we just drank and quit going to class. I pretty much bombed out of college in 1995. The sexual immorality continued. It actually got worse. And then I was introduced into the drug scene. Okay, now the way I'm going with all this, first of all, is I want to point out some statistics. Again, not automatically condemned, but kids without strong father figures are more likely for, like I said, sexual immorality, substance abuse, and all that stuff. And it is not gender specific, and it is definitely not ethnic or socioeconomic, whatever you want to call it, specific. There's a statistic that it says a white teenage girl from an advantaged background. Okay, so a white girl from Cascade, Byron Center, Granville, Forest Hills, is still 5 times more likely to become a teen mom if she grows up without a father in the home than if she grew up with 2. So again, bottom line comes down to this: sin has no bounds in so many areas, right? So I eventually pursued into, I tried smoking marijuana a couple times, honestly hated it. So Dan was from Tampa, so in 1996, he said, hey, let's go down there for spring break. I said, okay, cool, because I was so wise at 20 years old to go down there in 1996. That was in April. By October, I'm moving to Tampa, Florida, and the floodgates opened down there. I found a world that I have never even knew existed. I went into a world that was just packed with businesses, and Tampa has all the major sports teams. I lived right down the road from the Bucks Stadium, and it's just it's actually an awesome city for anybody that's ever been there. But there's also clubs and bars that open at 3 a.m. down there. The women's scene was incredible down there. You're coming from Traverse City to Florida. It was like, I can't even explain, what it does to a 20-year-old guy. But eventually, the trap was being set more and more, and Satan was getting his grip on me, but I didn't know it. I had a great job. I worked at a 4-star hotel doing room service. I was walking out of there with cash in hand every night, which is, again, a very dangerous thing, being 20, 21 years old. And for the most part, I partied a lot, and I would go to work, and then I basically called it, like they say with the shampoo, lather, rinse, repeat. I'd go home, I'd sleep for a couple hours, go to work, go back out all night, and that pursued for about 3 years. So I said, I think I'm getting in a little too much trouble down here. Oh, by the way, I missed one of the most important parts here. Down there in Florida, obviously the drug scene is very big. It's very accessible when you have Cuba and Puerto Rico and Colombia and all these areas that come into there. And that's where I actually started engaging in harder narcotics such as cocaine and especially ecstasy. I was using ecstasy up to 5 times a week, okay? And which, if anyone knows what it does to the brain, it completely depletes your brain of serotonin and dopamine and all those things. So I'm sucking all these necessary chemicals out of my brain. So I'm partying down there, and I say, I'm getting in too much trouble down here. I need to move back to Grand Rapids. That's the Bible Belt. There's no way you can get in trouble in Grand Rapids because it's West Michigan, right? And it's really weird that the fact that even though I didn't have a strong relationship with my dad, I still missed my dad. He was living up here, so I said, I'm going to move back up here and be by my dad. My mom and my little brother still live down there. And I came up here, and basically I tied directly into drug dealers. I tied directly into sources. I began to sell cocaine myself. I began to sell ecstasy myself. The drinking got worse. The sexual immorality continued. And basically what I perceived to be a safe move became the absolute darkest years of my life. Now I'm telling about 20 years here in about 10 minutes. But the addiction grew and it grew. And I remember the specific time when I looked at my friends. I said, this is no longer for fun. I said, this is now for survival. And they said, okay, whatever, survival. And I knew for the first time in my life, I was truly, truly screwed, okay? And February 22, 2001, it came to a head, and I had been up on about a 3-day binge, and I didn't know whether I wanted to live, whether I wanted to die. I just wanted out of my addiction. And I went to like CVS or Walgreens or something. I bought a bottle of over-the-counter sleeping pills like Nital or Tylenol PM. I poured the whole bottle down my throat, 32 pills. I drank on top of it. Didn't know God at the time, but I truly believe that's the first time he began to talk to me. And I said, oh man, I need to call somebody quick. And I called my ex-girlfriend, who I was still in contact with, and she said, oh my gosh. So next thing I know, I just hear, boom, 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 and there's the cops at my door. I remember talking to the police officer for about a minute or two, and then it was lights out, and I passed out. I woke up in the hospital. So I wake up, my dad's there, my stepmom's there, my half-brothers and sisters, who I had contact with by this point. There's a lot that had transpired from the time I finally met them, and now, we're a great family. But I remember them waking up, and I don't remember a lot, because my head was honestly pretty cloudy at the time. But I do remember my dad saying one thing, and he said, could I have done something different? Could I have been a better dad? And I said, Dad, I'm an adult, I can make my own decisions, which is true. I was 2 months shy of my 25th birthday. But at the same time, it does make me wonder if you had been there, if you had invested, if Mom had invested in me and my brother Dave. He was just as bad, if not worse than I was, my little brother. So if they'd done something, would my life have been different? So I clean up, I sober up, I go to AA, NA, CA, you name it. If it ends with an A, I was in it. Okay, CA is Cocaine Anonymous, by the way. NA is Narcotics Anonymous. Started going to church because that's what we do. You go to meetings. Higher power, translated usually in West Michigan, means God, which means church. So I went to church, and 3 weeks into church, there was an altar call. And I raised my hand because it sounded good. I didn't know what I was doing, but I raised my hand. And I remember everybody saying, this is awesome, and I'm walking down the aisle, and I went down there, and I met some guy. He shook my hand. He said, okay, repeat after me, and I prayed this prayer. And I went in, I told everybody, I went home, and I told everybody, I said, I got saved today. And they're like, that's awesome. And even my partying friends said, man, that is awesome. They said, I'm not going to do it, but good for you. But the very few Christian friends that I had said, I'm so proud of you. This is awesome. And man, I had this whole world in front of me now. Man, this addiction's behind me, and I'm pushing forward. So I started going to church and all that, but there's never any follow-up from the church. No one ever scooped me up, and eventually that glow wore off. And on my 18-month anniversary, which would be August 22, 2002, I said, I got this. So I went back out, had a beer. I said, I had one, why not keep going? And that became more and more. I overdosed 2 months later. And then on November 11, 2002, my little brother and I got in a fight. I basically said, pull over the car, I'm leaving. He didn't pull over the car, so I left the car. Problem was, we were on northbound 131 on the S-curve. This is what happens when your face hits the concrete out of a moving car. I rolled headfirst into a concrete wall. I should have been killed on impact. I should have snapped my neck. I should be a vegetable. I walked out with nothing more than 2 facial fractures and a concussion. I can honestly say that I'm a very hard-headed guy. And there's a lovely selfie a couple weeks later. So honestly, that one hurt. I can say, a hangover is one thing, but I had a headache for probably a week after that. Should have been killed on impact, but obviously God had different plans. So I clean up, I sober up, go back to church, go back to meetings again, lather, rinse, repeat. 3 years, I'm clean and sober. I'm working my program, I'm doing great. But there was one area that I was not letting go of, and that was the part with the girls. And I met a girl in March of 2005. By June or July that year, she was pregnant. And 9 months later, I became a father myself, to my beautiful daughter named Olivia. And for the first time in my life, I had another purpose. And now I'm not only responsible for myself, which I was failing miserably at, but I also had this beautiful little baby girl. Turns out after having nothing more than a physical relationship with a girl for 4 months, you don't get along very well. So she and I were just at opposite ends. She basically said, if we're not going to be together, you're not going to see your daughter. There were court battles. There was all sorts of things. And here I am just on the verge of another relapse. And I'm freaking out. And I said, I can't do this, which is the perfect setup for what God can do in our lives when we get to that point. So I had a friend said, hey, why don't you come to my church? I said, all right, cool, whatever. I'll come to your church. And I walked to this church, and this was on January 7, 2007. And the pastor spoke. It was an 8 a.m. service. This is when some churches, Calvary does early services too. But I was at the 8 a.m. service, and I had been to church by this point. I'd done the roller coaster thing, for about 6 years. Good, bad, in the hokey pokey. You put one foot in, take it out, with God, and do all that stuff. And finally, I just sat there and I listened. And I can't tell you what the sermon was about. All I can tell you, and most of us have experienced this at least once, if not multiple times in our lives. Luke 24, chapter 24, disciples are on the road to Emmaus. Jesus appears. You know the story. He's walking, talking with them. They don't know who he is. They don't recognize him. He's sharing the scriptures with them. They sit down. They have dinner. He breaks the bread. He disappears. And they say, wait a minute. That was, Jesus. And they said, what did they say to each other? Verse 32. Were not our hearts burning within us when he shared the scriptures with us? And that was my true heartburn sermon. So I responded to an altar call, and I maybe got saved in 2001. But January 2007, I approached the altar, and I took a knee, and I died on the altar that day. I buried myself there, and I got baptized 4 months later. And the next year, through the leading of some amazing men, God put some amazing men instantly. I hooked up with my first mentor named Tim, and then I was invited into a men's small group, and I walked in a small group. A lot of guys like you guys, you guys are married and business guys, and you guys all have it together. So I'm looking, I'm like, what can I bring to this group? First of all, I found out that nobody has it together, but I looked, I said, man, I'm the youngest guy in this group. I'm the only single dad in this group. I said, what can I bring? And I said, wait a minute. And that's where I did the Google search. And that's where God led me into the single dad ministry, which has continued to grow and evolve over the course of the years there. But immediately, God was placed in these men in my life. Today, well, I'll tell you this right now, by His grace only, this past December, so last month, 7 years sober and 10 years clean. And that's only because of what He's done in my life as well. Here's me and Olivia. This was April of 2014. We were on our way down to Florida for spring break. And I just got married 6 months ago. And then there's, finally took the dive. It's the second time I've approached the altar. Once for Jesus and once for her. But there's me and my daughter. We have a phenomenal relationship. And I was just talking to one of you guys here earlier. Even, I'm not going to lie, her mom, God love her, Jesus died for her, but if there's still ever a thorn in my side, she has never released the anger, never released the bitterness, but each and every day I find myself on my face praying for her. I now even encourage her. Her and my daughter are having troubles, and when I can set me aside and I can talk to my daughter and say, this is what Mommy's trying to say. And this happened just a couple weeks ago. We were laying in bed and I was talking to my daughter, and she says, Daddy, you always make me feel better. Do you know what that does to, any of us, any of you guys, especially little girls? Not that a little boy can't do this too, but a little girl. And for her to say that, and it just shows what God said in my life, that I am now able to push all of me aside. Like John says, I must decrease, He must increase. So it has continued to grow and evolve. I have the 2 books now. I get an opportunity to speak both locally and nationally. Actually, you guys need to pray for me. I'm going to my second single mom conference in July. 800 single moms will be at this. I went to one a couple years ago. There was 700 at this one, and this is when I was dating my now wife. And she says, well, I trust you. I said, you don't need to trust me. I said, you got to worry about me making it home alive, because I'm pretty sure these women aren't all happy with the dads. But here's my wife, Christy. That's our engagement pictures. And there, we just got married here. So God has literally, back it up a second, taken me from this to this. And this is what He can do. But here's the thing. He's also continued. Christy's dad is an amazing man of God. And he has filled my own daddy gap. I wrote the book called The Daddy Gap. My father-in-law has told me that he loves me more in the last 2 or 3 months than my dad has said in 39 years. My dad isn't exactly Gene Hackman. Okay, I'm not going to say he did that kind of stuff. He didn't do some of the best stuff. My dad has a lot of great qualities, and I love him. And there's an initiative called Honor Your Father Today. It's on my website. If you go on the website, honoryourfathertoday.com. Good or bad, how we as men need to continue to honor our fathers, because the Bible says that we must honor them, that our days will go well, right? But thank God that He has put these sort of men in my lives as well. So now I'm able to take, men like Claire, my father-in-law. I have a prayer partner. I have an accountability partner. I purposely seek out these older guys to pour into me now to build a support system that I can pour in not only into the single dads, but also going back to what I was saying about mentoring as well. I mentor 2 boys right now. I mentor a 3rd grader and a 5th grader. The 3rd grader lives in a somewhat intact home. His mom and stepdad. I just mentor him, help him with reading. We play some games. The 5th grade boy is very, very vulnerable right now. He's 11 years old, no father. Okay, African-American kid. Statistics say right off the bat, he's heading for trouble if nobody steps in. So that's kind of my goal with him, is to step in and hopefully be a positive influence as well. So that is pretty much, where I'm at. My favorite verse, you all know it. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I've been on the steal, kill, and destroy side. Never killed anyone, but there was obviously a target on my head. I was one of the lowest POSs in society, the guy you did not want your daughter dating. And Jesus has now given me this abundant life. It's definitely not financial. If anything, I took a massive hit when I went into ministry in a lot of ways. But to be able to pour into these guys, to have my daughter say, you always make me feel better, to be able to speak to other guys, to mentor boys, these are the abundant life. These are the things. So, and I know you guys all know this. The rest of the stuff is temporary. But it's what we do eternally, and I truly, truly believe that fathers, if we're ever to turn this nation around, the bleeding with, we can do jail ministry, we can do rehab ministry, we can do teen ministry, we can do all that stuff, but we have to get to the dads, because otherwise it's like clipping the head off of a weed. And you can pretty much make a case that every, societal problem, domestic problem, anything like that, stems back to one question, says, where is dad? So I encourage you guys to continue to pour into your own families, pour into your wives, your children. If you're able to mentor, or at least encourage a fatherless boy, but we got to lock together, go to the conferences, the No Regrets or the Iron Sharpens Iron, because if men are operating individually, the average man in America, I think if I'm quoting this right, I think the average person has only 2 friends that they can completely rely on. 2. Okay? And that's saying that those 2 friends only have 2, so there's really not a lot of camaraderie. Okay? I think only like 25% of adults have like 4 or more friends that they can confide in. That means there's a lot of people out there that are extremely lonely and trying to operate against an eternal enemy, when in fact, not only do we have to, bow before God each and every day, but we need to sharpen each other and lock arms with each other. Because I'll tell you what, strong Christian men are probably the most unstoppable force on the face of the earth against the kingdom of darkness. Amen? Okay. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Question for Matt.
Yes.
I'm not sure how this fits in, but when I sit with some of my closest friends, we find that one of the common backgrounds we have was distant dads. My closest friends and I don't come from homes with a close relationship with our dad. So, like Brandon here grew up not really knowing my dad. We laugh about it sometimes because he had a certain way to hell about him, if you weren't listening. But the common trait we seem to have gotten from that background is we all became kind of working fools.
Mm-hmm.
We went and applied ourselves differently, almost partly to escape. I'm not sure how that fits your story. Some of us didn't get off the road as far as you
Right.
did. We got into addictions that the world applauds.
Right.
Like workaholism.
Right, and money and all that. So, just like anything, obviously, we all fill voids, and more than likely, if we're operating outside of the Spirit, then we're going to fill it with something. And I would say workaholism. My dad is a workaholic. The guy just turned 80, 80, and he still works 90 hours a week. He owns a business. The funeral and the retirement party are going to be the same thing, like literally. So he has compensated his failures with something like that and chased after money. And eventually it's just, I don't even think it's anything about work anymore. It's kind of like somebody that's been in prison. It's institutionalization. So kind of to answer that, first of all, there's statistics that show, and I know not all of us have like little babies, but up to 26% of all men experience postpartum depression, which we don't hear a lot about for guys, but experience postpartum depression within the first 12 months of their children's life. Now here's the thing. How many of us actually walk into, a counseling office or to our mentor, our pastor, say, "Man, I am depressed," right? We don't address it, and it doesn't even have to be PPD. It could just be something. Honestly, I think truly knocked my dad off. Before him and my mom got together, my dad had a 5-year-old son that was killed in an accident, and I think he started to bury himself in work instead of addressing it. And eventually, what he wanted as a healing ended up consuming him, and then that's where he led to other things as well. So I think that's, to say is, if we don't guard our hearts, we will fill voids, because depression, if not treated right away, or even if it doesn't get into true depression, but we're really bummed out, eventually within us guys, because we hold it in, it will manifest, and it leads to workaholism, it leads to addiction, it leads to isolation, it leads to affairs, and all that. And a fathering void, a father wound, that's actually a true clinical term. Google it sometime. It's actually a true clinical term. Father wound is something, so we fill those voids with something. That's, like I said before, our dads, one way or another, have the ability to make us or break us as adults. Does that kind of, I mean, I guess basically bottom line is, and for those of us that didn't have great dads, if we're able to talk to them, might be one of the, I mean, I can preach to you guys, I can go into a prison and share my story, but to sit down and tell my dad that I forgive him and I love him, I did it probably about 2 or 3 years ago. It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I literally had to read it off of paper because I couldn't get the words out of my mouth. But we have to forgive them. We got to tell them we love them, and if they're not here anymore, take it before God as well. And that's what that Honor Your Father Today website is about as well. Another one?
What has come of you and your brother?
My little brother? He's actually, he's a Christian now too. Oh, big, awesome part too. I mean, he's a Christian, and he actually does street evangelism. He's all into unless you want to go through the book of Revelations, don't talk to my brother, okay? Because he's all about end of times and all these prophecies that are coming down and all that stuff. But he lives in Daytona, and he does street evangelism, and he's baptized, he's saved. Like I said, Dan, my best friend, is now a pastor as well down there. But here's the cool part. My dad wasn't the only one to commit adultery in the family. My grandma, his mom, committed it. My dad, my uncle, my brothers, me. My dad's side of the family is plagued with adultery. My mom's side of the family, drug and alcohol addiction, right down the line. So I had this perfect storm. So we've heard the term generational curses, right? Okay. I was born with a generational curse on me, and I followed suit of what my parents did. It's amazing that even without the leading, it's not like they coaxed me into drinking or adultery, but I followed suit into that. I come to faith in Christ, I'm baptized, and on December 9, 2012, my daughter Olivia gave her life to Christ. She's getting baptized in March here too. So within one generation, I have seen how God has snapped the generational curses here in my family. And now I'm married to Christy, and she's an amazing woman of God. You could not have two more opposites. She grew up in this perfect CRC home. I mean, the 2 kids and the white picket fence. They even got the little lap dog, and they got all that stuff. I grew up on the opposite. And here's the funny thing. She grew up in the CRC, like she was born with the Bible and a hymnal in her hand, and I got saved in the Assemblies of God. So, I mean, you can't get more opposite in the spectrum there. So, I mean, we were at her church not too long ago. We're singing hymns, and I'm like, I got to put my hand up. She's like, stop it, Because in the Assemblies of God, they're like, hey, come on, get your hands up, So, any other questions? Sure, Daryl.
Matt, you said that your daughter pronounces daddy always makes you feel better. Kind of two-part question. So I assume that didn't happen overnight. How long would it take you to kind of build that relationship? 9 years. And the second part is, do you think it's more what you do or what you say, or a combination?
Yes. So, well, we've all heard the phrase, more is caught than taught, which is true. I mean, we are our biggest role models for our kids, So, fortunately, my custody I was sharing with you earlier, right off the bat, I always got Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and then every other weekend with my daughter. So ever since she's an infant, I've seen her 2 days a week and every other weekend. We rotate holidays. I've never lived more than, at the farthest, 20 miles from her mom, and now it's currently 9. So, I mean, I'm involved. So I think that consistency over the time, in a lot of ways, I'm not saying being a single dad was an advantage, but let's face it, think of your schedule. Think of your work time. Your kids are in extracurricular activities. How many hours a day do you guys truly get when your kids were young or still with your kids? Do you get 3 hours a day that you can hang out with your kids? At one point I had Olivia up to 6 or 7 hours during the day. So I mean, dads just don't get that amount of time. So in a lot of ways, having this partial custody turned out to be a blessing, because when I had her, and then when I have her for the weekend, I have her for the full 48 hours, and I make sure I make a point of that. So I think that she and I have always had a great relationship. Now, just like anything, kids, even in 2-parent homes, are going to grow up, and they're going to, at one point they'll gravitate towards dad just naturally, but then they want their mom, and, so the kids kind of bounce back and forth, and not even playing parents against each other. But, at some point, here's your little boy, but, he gets to a point, he says, man, I really just want to be with mom. So Olivia and I have been I've been very intentional. I wasn't the best dad always. There was a lot of times when she was a baby, I was so tired, I just put her down for a nap, whether or not she was tired or not, just so I could lay down for a bit. I'd put her in the crib, which is basically a cage, for a little while, just so I could relax. But then I realized that I was wasting that time as well. So I just think a lot of consistency, but just like anything too, the more I sought after God and the more I started taking her to church. There's a statistic, listen to this. If a mom takes her kids to church, if mom takes it, and dad doesn't go at all, okay, so just mom. Mom could be the biggest, praise Jesus, woman in the world. There's still only a 1 in 50 chance those kids will grow up to attend church on a regular basis, 2%. If dad goes on even an irregular basis, just part-time, 50% chance it jumps to. From 2% to 50%. If dad goes on a regular basis, that number, when these kids grow up to be adults, jumps to a 67 to 75% chance that these kids will become regular or irregular worshipers. So that is the power and the influence. If a child gets saved in a family, 15% chance that the family will come to Christ. If mom gets saved, 25% chance. If dad gets saved, there's a 75% chance that all the family members will come there. So the more I pressed into God, the more I believe it began to develop my relationship with her. So the encouragement would be to pray with our kids, okay, regularly. For those of us still got younger ones, we, after dinner time, me, my wife, and my daughter, we just read a passage of Scripture, 2-3 verses, and even Olivia now, she's going through the Bible. And then, what was the second part of the question? How long did it take to develop? I think it just developed naturally.
Is it more about what you do or what you say?
Yeah, and that's both. You need to live your faith out, because my daughter's mom, again, she goes to church, she takes my daughter to church, at least my daughter's getting church, but do I see the fruit? No, I'm not judging. I'm just saying I don't think the gospel is being lived out in that home, but, it's different because we all know, we know people that go to church, but then you're like, hey, the things aren't matching up here, but we know the people that are truly living it out as well. And even not only the gospel, but just being consistent. If you say you're going to be at something, be at it. If you can't make it to a game or a concert, tell them that. Hey, I got to work today, or I'm going to be out of town. I'm sorry. But make it up to them and things like that. But our words carry tremendous weight in our kids' lives, but so do our actions as well. So I'd say it's both.
Just a heads up to us, dads. I read recently that it's more distressing for kids if their dads are physically present but emotionally absent than if they're both physically and emotionally absent.
Okay.
And that's so easy to do, whether it's television or the iPhone.
Yep.
To be there physically, but not to be there at all in any other way. Then the kid is close enough to smell it.
Yep.
But doesn't get to eat.
And what message are you sending too? That the iPhone and the emails are more important. I try to be conscious about that. I try to, when I have my daughter, to not check on emails or stuff like that. So who has daughters here? Let's call it 6 or above. Anybody got daughters? Even older one? Okay, so for those guys that have them, especially living at home, I learned a really cool trick from this lady. Her name's Michelle Watson. She's never been married. She has no kids. She's a counselor in Portland, Oregon. But her entire ministry is called the Abba Project. It's specifically for fathers with daughters, specifically 13 to 30-year-olds. But one of the things that she says is for us guys, if your daughter has a mirror or a whiteboard, each and every day, write words of love or something on her mirror. You are so beautiful, but why are you beautiful? I love the way your eyes sparkle. I love the way you braid your hair. I love that new dress. Speaking these words, and you write this. So now, Olivia doesn't have a mirror in her room, but I take sticky notes. So every time she comes over, there's a new sticky note on her door that says, Olivia, I love that we get to do this. I'm so proud of you for this, and be specific. And even if your kids are grown, send them a text message, call. By the way, and they might say, Dad, you're so lame, But I'll tell you what, if a father is speaking into their daughters or your sons, because our sons need to hear this too, and all they're hearing is, I love you, I'm proud of you, this is what God says about you, and you are speaking because we know what the world is saying to them. This is what a man is, this is what a girl is or a woman is, and you got to silence that. So that's the emotional part as well. So thanks for bringing that up. Yep. Anything else? Well, guys, I know we are out of here at 8:30, so.
I've got a question for you.
Okay.
I know the answer, but it's a setup.
Okay. Of course it is.
Acts ministry, now keep in mind, he's the biggest ministry in the country. to roughly 30 million people, kids who live in Canaan. His budget is about $20,000 a year. He doesn't have any office, doesn't have any employees, doesn't have anything. We're talking, as he said, we don't know to laugh or cry over that. It's just nuts. Why is it you think people care so little about, there's all kinds of single mother ministries.
Mm-hmm.
They got 800 people coming to Louisiana, for instance.
Yeah.
Why is it that people aren't that wild about single fathers, or don't care?
Well, I mean, a lot of times, first of all, I want to define a single father. Not necessarily always a guy, although this is true, that has primary custody of his kids. That's only 17% of the time, 83% of the time moms have it, but it's the stereotype that comes with it too. Well, if mom's in the picture, or mom's got the kids and all, well, clearly, it's his fault. Clearly he got her knocked up and he abandoned her. Or if there was a divorce, clearly it was his fault, and things like that as well. So I think that there's this massive stereotype on the dads. On my website, there's one of my articles, if you go on the articles page, there's an article I wrote, it's called Why Single Fathers Matter. And that's basically going back to all the statistics. So 83% of the time, the father will not have custody, but that doesn't mean he's not the dad. So, and the same thing. I mean, my daughter's mom, hates my guts. That's something she has to deal with. That's something between her and God. But I can guarantee you that if somebody had asked her, probably still even, oh, that's a beautiful daughter, is the dad involved? What she says and what I say would be two totally different things. So a lot of times we might see the mom and we might get that story, but we don't know, just like anything, we don't know what's on the other side. So we just automatically assume there's a stereotype put on the guys as well. However, they are starting to recognize this. I think the courts and everybody are finally starting to realize, like, hey, we need to get the dads involved more. And there is a big push on fatherhood nationally. Courts are starting to recognize that more as well. So we got to reach, not only, my real target market here isn't just the Christian single fathers that got full custody, but actually more the non-custodial, unchurched dads. That's where the biggest market is. Because if we don't get to those guys, the cycle's just going to keep repeating itself over and over.
On that note, I often wonder, when these couples are separated or divorced, they're lobbing shells back and forth. And sometimes in business you get in the middle of these, like you're hearing from both or one.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a word of wisdom that you could sometimes, sometimes it's just a wise comment or something that makes them think, wow, okay, why did I say that? Is there something that you think of as a
We're talking about, like, if you're talking to both parents or either or?
Exactly. It's always that guy's the jerk or she's this.
Right.
And I'm just saying, is there something that sometimes you would say that go?
Well, very general, and there is times it's not a rare occasion on my part. So sometimes I actually am friends with both of them. And sometimes I meet the mom first, and the mom actually puts me in contact with the dad, and the dad, agrees to meet with me. So sometimes I meet the mom first, and I don't play, favorites or anything like that. I try to stay as neutral as possible. And I tell the guys too, I say, hey, listen, and the moms too, whatever is talked between us, unless the children I think are going to they're in harm's way. But case in point, I have a friend who I'm friends with his ex-wife, but he also is in my group. And I tell him, I say, hey, anything you tell me will not go back to her. But I always tell anybody, where's your heart in this? It's a heart check. Because if you can tell when they start talking about their exes or something, and their voice gets high-pitched, and they start talking very fast, and they're like, well, shit, stop. Come back down to level. Just chill out a second, dude. Where's your heart with all of this? And sometimes they're not ready. So sometimes, I've had guys cry in front of me and say, she ruined my life. I have one guy, this is tragic. She divorced him for another guy. She upgraded. He makes more money and all that stuff. And she got to take the kids with her from the courts. So he's standing picking up the pieces saying, what did I do? Apparently she just didn't want to be with him anymore. And she said, I'm going to go marry him. He's got more money. I like him better. And now he's picking up the pieces, But those are tough situations as well. But I think a lot of it comes down to, I told Claire this yesterday, there's no one size fits all. I could have 10 people in the room in 10 totally different situations. But just like anything, where is the heart with all of this? And some of these guys are more mature and they're able to pull their feelings down. And some of them are just so hell-bent on getting even, and she did this, she. Okay, well, what about you? What about God? Where's God in all this mix as well?
So pick up